For those of you who haven't read Eve Memoir yet, sit down while I read it to you as you look at random content from my life. Chapter 1. When I was little, I was convinced that I was cursed with the name Eve. Who would blame me? Really? My grandma was a Jehovah's Witness and she would bring me to the Kingdom Hall for worship. Well, all I ever heard about was how bad Eve was. Nobody liked her ass. She's literally described in the Bible and other holy books as the reason why there is evil in the world. I mean, Eve made Adam bite the apple, even though he gave her his rib. It doesn't matter your religion or your faith, everybody figures that Eve was bad news. So to be named Eve, imagine carrying around that in your head all day. Thinking your name after the woman who invented original sin? Ugh, I wanted answers. I asked my mom all the time, why you name me that? And eventually she told me, I just look like one. Wow, okay. My middle name was Jahan, an alternate spelling of Jahan, because my mom liked the name Shah Jahan, who was the Mughal Empire of India who built the Taj Mahal. At least I had that going for me. So my name is Eve Jahan, and honestly, there really isn't much more to my name, but I didn't learn just how important it was all until I was much older. The name Eve actually means the first woman or the first lady in the Bible, and Jahan is Persian for the world or the universe. So technically, my name means the first woman of the universe. When I really understood what that meant, when it really clicked for me, you couldn't tell me shit after that. I knew I was put here for a reason, and I channeled all that gumption into adopting this by any means necessary attitude into the game, where I was going to get things done regardless. My mother used to tell me that as a kid, if someone told me no or that I couldn't do something, I would go ahead and do it anyway. So subconsciously, I always embodied the name without realizing it. I was never the type to be told I can't, no matter what it was, because in my mind, I always could regardless. It's also the main reason why I never competed with anyone. If I knew I had a specific person on this planet and I knew what my name meant, then how would I look sizing myself up next to someone else? I've just never really cared about competition with other people. Okay, except for maybe one. September 14th, 1999 was the date that my debut album hit the streets, Let There Be Eve, Rough Riders' First Lady. The title alone showed the world I was, in fact, Eve, the first woman of the Rough Riders universe. It was the moment that I waited for my whole life and the culmination of everything I had worked towards. On the day of my album was released, I found out that Jay-Z had called and wanted to talk to me, and it was like an added layer of excitement. A few years ago, there was this question that was posed on social media about whether you take 500,000 or have a meeting with Jay-Z. When Jay-Z called me in 99, I technically had both. He'd only been active in the music industry for a few years at this time, but his name rang bells. So it meant something to get a phone call from Jay-Z. I expected a congratulations from him, and I got it. Or sort of. He did open the call with congratulations, but then he chased it with something like, but don't be too upset because female hip-hop albums don't really do that well. Huh? Now, let's be clear. In 1999, no one was doing as good as they could have been doing in hip-hop or any other genre because Napstar had just came out that summer. The whole game was on high alert and everybody was throwing around terms like music piracy or, as if we like to call it in hip-hop, bootlegging. But for Jay-Z to call me up and explain to me how the odds were stacked against me as a woman when everyone was fighting an uphill battle was ballsy. So I had to show him. To me, it felt more like a challenge than an insult. A battery was immediately put in my back. In that moment, it felt like another male roadblock on my ride to fame. Before my album even touched record store shelves, I've already been through that major label rent cycle of being signed, unsigned, then signed again. All at the hands of men who love my lyrical talent, yet if I opened my mouth to voice anything but a bar, I was a problem. My debut album went to #1 on the Billboard 200, making me the third female rapper in history to achieve that feat. It went double platinum, which again in 99 was hard for anyone to do, but I did it. Take that, Napster. Take that, Jay-Z. So yeah, I channel my ambitions and frustrations into competing with Jay-Z, or at least Jay-Z's perception of the success of women in hip-hop. You may find that ironic, but I needed someone that I had to constantly prove wrong. Some might laugh that I chose him. I doubt he would stare at himself in the mirror and ask, what would Eve do? I get it. Look, we all have our own invisible bully, the person we battle in our minds, so to speak. Sometimes it's your coworker always giving you backhand compliments about your performance in the company, celebrating your wins, yet always making sure to add caviar. And in many ways, Jay-Z was that coworker and hip-hop was our company. So my innate response was to tip over the proverbial water cooler and flip some desks on the way to the corner office. Jay and I have always been cool, and I'm sure he never even knew what the call did for my drive. Now he does, and I guess I should thank him for it. The reality, though, is he just a representation of the real belief for me and so many other women, the music industry? Our success stories are always undersold. Even when we're lapping men, we're still called slept on or underrated as a means of keeping us below the industry sea level. For me, it was simultaneously being called the pit bull in a skirt and an underdog. My moves were drowning out those words, but they were still used to keep me down. I'm speaking for both myself and other women here, especially black women. Telling me that I was going to fail wasn't protecting my fragile female heart from disappointment. Was perpetuating a cycle that I wanted to break. Did I do that? Many times. Sometimes I won, sometimes I lost. But eventually I realized that if the music industry wasn't going to let me be the first woman of the universe, then I had no choice. I had to leave and go build my own. Look at the map of Philadelphia. It almost resembles the shape of a hand making the peace sign. I guess it's only right that it's called the city of brotherly love, though sometimes that nickname is a little ironic if you ask me. Philly was my home though, and no matter where I've gone since then, it still is. I was born on November 10th, 1978 at Penn Presbyterian Hospital in West Philadelphia. My mother Julie was 17 when she had me and named me Eve Jahan Jeffers. My father Jerry was around the same age and played bass in a band. That's how my parents first met. He also used to DJ in my grandma's basement during the summer. He'd fill that basement with people, and as a little kid, I'd go down there to watch him spin soul records. For the first part of my childhood, my mom's family and I all lived in one apartment in the high rises of the Mill Creek housing project in West Philly. You want to talk about a full house? It was me, my mom, my grandma, my granddad, my Aunt Karen, and my Uncle Johnny, and eventually my cousin Takia. I was 6 when she was born. We were packed into a 4-bedroom place where I shared a bedroom with my mom. Aunt Karen and Takia shared a room. My grandparents had theirs, and then my Uncle Johnny had his. So basically, my whole family lived under one roof. I do have 2 uncles, my Uncle Johnny and my Uncle Jeffrey. Uncle Jimmy was in and out of prison for a lot of my life. Uncle Jimmy wasn't allowed around the house when my granddad was home. I never asked any questions about that. As a little kid, it felt like West Philly was just a lot of big buildings on top of other big buildings, including my own at Milk Creek. The story of Mill Creek goes that the 3 high-rise buildings in our projects and all of the surrounding low-rises were built on top of this one creek, Mill Creek. So the land was never actually steady enough to hold anything up. The foundation could literally cave in at any moment, and the residents would just have to live with that hanging over their heads every single day. So on top of all the other fears you could have while living in West Philadelphia, I could add being swallowed by the earth to my list. Mill Creek eventually became famous again in 2000 for something called the Lex Street Massacre, when 4 guys shot 10 people in a crack house on Lex Street over a busted up car and some drug money. 7 of them died and 3 were injured. It made history as the deadliest mass murder in all of Philadelphia. It was right around where I grew up. Now everything is knocked down and they planted a sustainable community farm there. The creek is still sitting right under it. After my cousin Takia was born, we all moved down to the low-rise houses on a little side street called Olive Walk. The narrow little street had all these red brick box houses and each shared a wall and stoop with the house next to it. We had a little grass. I wouldn't call it a park or anything, but it wasn't enough to play on. And you could see one of the high-rise buildings right in front of us, along with a big-ass empty field across the street where nothing was ever built. If you walk through the alleyways and over the high-rises, you reach the main road named Murder Street, but everyone knew it was Murder Street. That nickname needs no explanation. The streets of West Philadelphia was checked with guns and crack, and the unfortunate victims were people who live along those streets, some dying from violence, others from overdoses. I never really understood that aspect of Philly until I was a little older. I just knew it was this big city to me, one that I would spend most of my time staring at through the train windows on the L. At home, I always felt like my surroundings were so dark, it's hard to explain. We would go to our neighbor's house sometimes, and their homes just felt so much lighter. It wasn't like we had darker wallpaper or paint on the walls, but even as a kid, I just felt like a darker aura in my home. My granddad had gradually developed a drinking problem, so sometimes he would come home drunk at night, turn on all the lights in the house, and just start yelling and arguing with everyone. We walked on eggshells whenever he was around, and every time he came home from work, we'd all run upstairs and hide. Then one day, many years later, he just changed and became this smiling, lighthearted person. It was crazy, but a welcome switch. He stopped drinking, but I can't just credit it to that. In my adult years, dealing with my own relationship with alcohol, I learned to acknowledge that come to Jesus moment because it was a total energetic shift that I noticed in him and later me. He wasn't very affectionate for most of my life though. Like the first time he hugged me was in my 30s and I was freaked out. My grandma is a Jehovah's Witness, which is how I wound up at the Kingdom Hall. She's still devout too, waiting for those 144,000 to be saved or go to heaven. My grandparents were always a mystery to me, even though my entire childhood was spent living with them. My cousin Takia and I used to joke and say they must have been like Bonnie and Clyde on the run and moved to Philly to set up a new life. Their backstory was like a total secret. All I knew was that my granddad was from Alabama and he was in the military, and my grandma was from Ohio and had a sister who she used to write to. And that's all I really know about them till this day. My grandma was a Jehovah's Witness. We didn't celebrate Christmas in our home or any birthdays, but I would watch The Sound of Music and The Nutcracker when they aired during the holidays, and that was my own little Christmas. My mom still bought me gifts though, and since my Aunt Karen loved the holidays, she celebrated with us outside of the house. On my father's side, the whole family is from North Carolina, so I spent summers there from age 6 until I was about 12. My grandparents, his parents, lived up the street from me in Philly, so I could literally walk up the hill to their house to visit them and spend time with my dad. Eventually, though, he stopped showing up, but I still did. And as much as I love my grandparents and my cousins, they weren't the ones I wanted to be with. I wanted to be with my dad. He admitted to me years later that he had a drug problem, and that's why he kept away from me, which I respected. And he never tried to show up once I became famous, like, Daddy's home. I respected that too. But as a kid who just wanted to hang out with her dad, I didn't know what was going on when he started vanishing back then. So I matched his energy one day and I said, I'm done, and stopped going to visit him at my grandparents' house. I couldn't take it anymore, and I just had to tell myself I'm good. He just kept disappointing me, not showing up when I invited him to my school graduations or anything else. When my mom and I moved farther away, it got easier for me to space out those visits too. I held on to that anger though, and I wasn't afraid to show him whenever I did see him. He and his brothers used to call me Evil Eve because I was always pouting whenever I was around them. I never smiled and always had an attitude. As an adult, I realized it was just me trying to get a response out of my dad. Something. I also realized the same anger fueled my desire and need to be seen and heard throughout most of my early adult life. I channeled all of that rage when I first picked up a microphone, but as a kid, I just wanted my dad's attention. Though honestly, I always wanted everyone's attention. When you're living in a packed house with all adults and one bassinet holding your baby's cousin, it's not always easy to get the attention you're seeking. So my little dramatic ass would find any corner of the house where everyone was in earshot and I'd sit down and sing a little song I made up. Nobody loves me. Nobody cares. Did I really believe that? Of course not. But I figured I could jetty mind trick them into playing with me or hearing all about my day if I convinced them that I felt unloved. When it didn't work, I get even more annoyed. I just had so much energy and I wanted everyone in on watching me use it. My mom used to tell me that I should have been born a boy with the way I act. I loved to wrestle with the other kids in my neighborhood, and when we did, then I had to be the Hulk Hogan or the Undertaker. I'd take either, but I had to be one or the other. I also wanted to play sports, like softball, and I loved being scared by horror movies. That was all my Aunt Karen's fault. My mom was in school and worked a lot, so I spent a lot of time with Aunt Karen. She took me to see all the movies I wasn't supposed to, like A Nightmare on Elm Street. My mom used to say to her, "Why do you keep taking her to see this shit?" Because I get so scared, but I love it. It's why horror is still my favorite film genre to this day. My Aunt Karen was always more like a big sister to me than an auntie. We were only 9 years apart, while me and my cousin Takia was 6 years apart. Being an only child for most of my childhood, it really felt like I had a big sister and a little sister in them. Plus, my Aunt Karen put me on a hip hop. She loved music so much, so all day, every day, music was around me. She even slept with the radio on. I hear LL Cool J coming from her room and I run in there to listen. I had this deep love of music and the arts that I just couldn't explain at that age, but I knew I needed it around me. I was also obsessed with words. I started writing poems when I was in elementary school at a long lock. I even won a bunch of awards. If rap stands for rhythm and poetry, I had the poetry part down pretty fast. I didn't know exactly what to do with the rhythm part though, but as a kid, I just wanted to somehow be a part of the music. At first, I wanted to take piano lessons, but we didn't really have the money for all of that. Reality hit when my mom took me to a place for lessons across the street from my elementary school, and the requirement was having a piano in your home, and we definitely didn't have one of those. After that, I told myself that one day when I grew up, I was going to have a piano in my house. In school, I wanted to play the cello, but they told me I wasn't big enough, so instead, I had to play the violin. I was so mad. They gave the cello to this other chick, so I learned how to play Ba Ba Black Sheep on the violin, and then I quit. I also sang in the school choir, and after begging my mom, she let me take ballet and tap lessons. I just wanted to be close to the music, whether I was singing or dancing or picking up and then ditching an instrument. By the time I was 12, the whole family picked up again and moved over to Wyalusing Avenue. You could say we got out of the hood, but it still kind of had a hood over there too. I transferred over to Our Lady of Victory School for my last 2 years of elementary school. That's when I really started getting into my own musical taste. My mom bought me a Discman and I was able to pick out 2 CDs, so I got the Nirvana's Nevermind and Bob Marley's Legend. I was already into reggae and dancehall with my Buju Bat and cassettes and whatnot, so I figured I'd add a Bob Marley CD to my collection too. By that point, my mom had already been dating her boyfriend Ron for a few years, and he took me and my friend Yvette to our first concert, Shabba Ranks, when I was 12. We wore matching dashikis and had these thick-ass braids like Patra did in her Queen of the Pack video. Once I saw the music live right in front of me on stage, I knew I wanted to be up there too. I had been singing in the choirs for years at this point, but I figured that wasn't going to get me enough attention since all the other girls sang too. So I decided to rap. Yvette and I linked up with other girls at school to form our own little group called DGP, which stood for Dope Girl Posse. We were just starting out, covering songs by Another Bad Creation and Color Me Bad, you know, all the hot shit at the time. Our touring circuit was only the school talent shows and sometimes block parties, but we made it work, and I just started taking it real seriously. Like, even though I was a kid, something in me knew that this was going to be the building blocks of something, so I couldn't half step. But DGP hit a major snag when my mom and Ron decided to get married and find a place of their own. So now I had a stepdad, and before I knew it, we were moving off of Wyalusing Avenue and into the suburbs of Germantown as our own little family. I still got to hang out with my Aunt Karen and grandparents every weekend, but Germantown was like 20 minutes away from West Philly, which in kid math might as well have been 3 hours away. DGP couldn't survive that commute, so we kind of fizzled out and I became a little solo artist. Within a year, my brother Farah was born, and I started my freshman year at Martin Luther King High School. Now, I know in most cities around the world, anything named after Martin Luther King is pretty terrible, sadly, but my high school was extra terrible. There was a lot of unnecessary shit going on in there. It was just wild. We had a police station right there in the high school. That's how bad it was. Our principal tried to be like Joe Clark and lean on me and walked around carrying a baseball bat, and we were all like, wait, are you smoking crack? In the midst of that chaos, I temporarily found peace in Islam. It wasn't too far off for me to be interested in becoming a Muslim since my stepdad was in the Nation of Islam and Philly is full of Muslim people from all walks of life. I made this new friend who was Muslim and she wore the hijab and she was also really cool and outspoken. I processed that as, hey, you can be cool and covered too. It's true, but with me, I just have to go all in. Like immediately, I'm talking about full-fledged Sunni Muslim after that. I wore hijab, started going by the name Mecca, and learned every surah and hadith that I could fit into my newly teenage brain. Like I could recite the first surah of the Quran, the Al-Fatiha, frontwards and backwards. There was even a place in school where we can go and pray during the day. The part that I missed in the brochure though is that you couldn't really curse and you can't smoke weed, and I definitely wanted in on both of those. Plus I was getting more drawn into rapping, and to me it felt like it was a conflict of interest. I didn't want to come across as a hypocrite, so after about 5 months I took off my hijab and I said my final Bismillah. After that, I guess you could say I converted to the Zulu Nation of hip hop. I continued writing poems, which evolved into writing full-fledged rhymes. That's when something really came alive in me, like I was plugged in. It's hard to explain that moment when it all made sense, when my poems and the music from Aunt Karen's bedroom and my dad's soul records and my love of rap and reggae and even playing my cello, piano, and violin just all started swirling into developing my mind, and something wonderfully, entirely new came out. It was something beautiful to me and something I needed to get out and share with the world. After that, I needed a place other than my notebook to put these words because I couldn't just keep them to myself any longer. I had to show them off, so I found the best place in the world to showcase them, the cipher. That was the end of chapter 1, and in the beginning, I read the intro. Let me know if you enjoyed chapter 1 and the intro, and write down what was your favorite part about this. Also, let me know if you want me to continue to post random content from my life as I read the story of Eve, Who's That Girl? And if you're ready for chapter 2, comment that down below and let me know, what did you enjoy the most out of my content? Did you like the food, the trips, the makeup? Let me know in the comments.